Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent, and this is the unit focus video on the Avatar of Khaine, in which I am going to be talking to you about how best to use the Avatar in pseudo-competitive play and in competitive play, and why it is significantly better in 9th edition than it was in 8th edition, despite not having had any changes to its stat line. You'll see on the table here, I have my Avatar of Khaine. That is the first Forge World iteration of the Avatar. If you're serious about playing with the Avatar and you are currently sitting on the GW sculpt of this model, which is this metal monstrosity from the early to mid 90s that I thought was really cool when I was 11, I strongly encourage you to invest in a Forge World Avatar. It really is a beautiful model, and it's sort of embarrassing to have your metal 1994 Avatar on the table next to equivalent models from other factions, Demon Princes and that sort of thing. It's not a good side-by-side. But the Forge World sculpts really are beautiful. The sculpt that Forge World is carrying right now has a spear. When I bought my Avatar, the sword version had just gone out of print. I had to dig one up on eBay. You can still get this sculpt on eBay pretty regularly for more or less normal Forge World prices, at least at the time of making the video. But the spear version is cool too. So if you're serious about playing with the Avatar, do think about a Forge World sculpt. I think it's worth it. Anyway, before we dive into how the Avatar functions on the table, how best to use it, I'm going to provide some context for this, and I'm going to start by saying a few things about emails that I get. So most of the email that I get about the channel and the website is enormously positive, which I really appreciate. A lot of work goes into writing those articles and creating these videos. But every now and then I get messages from readers who I'm pretty sure are actually Victorian mean girls. And here I'm using mean girls as a gender neutral term. These missives never include outright insults, but they are laced with phrases that amount to silk-gloved smackdowns, implying that I am an intellectual troglodyte for having the audacity to suggest that something they think sucks might actually be good. In some cases, the thing that they think sucks is the entire Craft Worlds faction, which I always find sort of startling when they start by saying, I've read all of your articles and I've watched all of your videos, and by the way, because why would you put that time in if you think that? Anyway, so normally what these people are mad about is that they think that I have oversold something, right? So I'm going to provide some context. I am not suggesting that the Avatar of Khaine belongs in every competitive Craft Worlds list. I am certainly not suggesting that it is equivalent to the most powerful monster models available to some other factions in the game. What I am suggesting is that it's gotten much better in 9th edition for reasons that I will go into, that if you use it in a very particular way or in very particular ways, it can be quite effective. And it is no longer just an emotional include, which it really was in 8th edition. In 8th edition, the Avatar was an emotional include. There was really no competitive reason at all to take it. And that isn't true anymore. But just in case there are any aspiring Jane Austen villains out there who are just really excited to write me hate mail, albeit elegant, well-spoken. I will say I'm kind of glad that the Eldar readers are the ones who send like the mean girls hate mail. I think that I don't know. I think that's on brand for us. I kind of like that. So in that sense, it delights me. But in order to avoid any more of those emails, I do want to be clear that I think that, the context for this is, yes, as a faction, Craft Worlds are not equivalent to first-tier factions in the game, but I really do think they have some competitive play on the table. They came in, a pure Craft Worlds list came in 4th in a GT recently, and early in 9th edition, a mixed Eldari list, including Craft Worlds and the Avatar of Khaine, did appear in a top 3 list at a GT. It has some play. It has some play used in very particular ways. So that's what we're talking about. First, the Avatar of Khaine has gotten so much better in 9th edition, and this is why. Back in 8th edition, the Avatar struggled to get into combat. It struggled to reach targets. It would run across the table, hopefully insulated from enemy fire by some infantry unit that would be quickly shot. Oftentimes, the Avatar never even survived long enough to see combat. It was too expensive for what it could do. And the 8th edition table is smaller than the 9th edition table. So that's a bonus because he doesn't have as far to go. In addition, the new focus on objective play, right, which forces your opponent out of her deployment zone to move lots of models into the middle of the table to contest objectives. There's going to be at least something, right, for your avatar to engage with, guaranteed, probably on turn 2. And that's a big change. It's a big shift, and a huge advantage for this model. The other thing that's changed, so the Avatar of Khaine, it's a monster in melee, right? The Avatar has 5 attacks. They're strength 8. I think -4 AP, and you roll 2d6 for damage. You take the higher damage roll, so it's super hard hitting, and it actually can hit. In a moment, we'll talk about why it hits even harder than that in 9th Ed. But the problem that it used to run into is that even once it would reach combat, yes, it's hard hitting, but it wasn't very good at taking a punch. It only has 8 wounds, and it has a 5-up invul and a 5-up feel no pain, but that's just not that great against an opponent with, I don't know, big claws that do flat 3 damage and a bunch of attacks or something like that. So frequently, the Avatar of Khaine would, back in 8th edition, reach combat, maybe ping off some Space Marine captain's invuln save or something, and then just get totally laid out. And that was a feel-bad moment, right? It's this powerful melee monster. To initiate a charge and then just have it be killed was brutal. But the Avatar of Khaine's best option for durability is a stratagem called the Avatar Resurgent, which costs 3 points, and that was out of reach in 8th edition. It was hard to get command points. You needed to include multiple detachments, lots of detachments. It was difficult for Eldar to just have or command point generating detachments, and so the Avatar of Khaine this Avatar Resurgent was a big ask as an expense. In 9th edition, when we're all starting with 12 in a 2,000 point game before we add any additional detachments, and we get one every turn, there are a lot more command points to play with. Suddenly, proportionally, the Avatar Resurgent is much less expensive. So it's much easier to keep this model on the table. It basically, if you have the command points, it basically cannot be killed in melee by a single enemy. So, it doesn't matter if it gets charged by a Smash Captain or a Keeper of Secrets or something, right? It will, if you have the command points, no matter what, it will survive to swing, and then you can bring it back. If it's killed on your turn, on the following turn, you could theoretically bring it back again. So it's tremendously durable now in melee. And again, you have to build your list with that expense in mind, right? Because if you're running the Avatar of Khaine, you need access to the Avatar Resurgent. So you do need, as you're allocating resources, you need to plan for that command point expense. But that's yet another change to the game in 9th edition that has given this model significantly more play. Other changes, we got our Psychic Awakening book. So again, although the Avatar of Khaine's actual stat line has not changed, the Avatar of Khaine's damage output is much different than it used to be. For one thing, monsters can now shoot when they are in combat. So the Avatar is armed with the Wailing Doom, which can manifest either as a sword or as a spear. You'll see that my sculpt has the sword option. I already talked a little bit about the other Forge World sculpt has the spear. It's the same weapon. And that is, in addition to being a melee weapon, right? It has its 5 attacks. It's also a shooting weapon. It only has a range of 12, so that isn't great. But the fact that you can shoot with it in combat means that you have a 6th attack with this weapon on your own turn, raising the Avatar's attacks from 5 to 6, increasing its damage output by 20%, which is no joke. When that damage output is 2d6, take the higher one for every hit. In addition, the Avatar can have craft world traits, unlike, say, Phoenix Lords. And some of those, although the traditional craft world options in the Codex really don't do anything for the Avatar. I mean, that's an exaggeration. The Alatok bonus, I guess. But if your Avatar is targetable at outside of 12 inches, if it's not insulated with Lookout Sir, you're not playing it well anyway. So really none of those... Sam Hain, rerolled some charges, but none of those craft world options are doing a whole lot for it. But the custom craft world options are really pretty good. So I, I hesitate to even say it because I know this drives some of you into a red rage. Some of you hate expert crafters, but the avatar with expert crafters is excellent, right? It's hitting on twos, and you can use crafters both in the shooting phase and in the melee phase. And so if you're engaged with something with the avatar, and in the shooting phase you shoot with the Wailing Doom, well, you're hitting on twos, rerolling ones. And then it's strength 8, so you're wounding on whatever, rerolling whatever. But then again, in the melee phase, you're rolling 5 dice, you're hitting on twos, rerolling 1/1, and then you've strength 8, you're rerolling something. So it becomes the equivalent. Those 5 attacks that it had in 8th edition, and technically still has on its stat line, in melee is now something like 7, maybe even 8, and that's conservatively. In addition, the equivalent of with the crafter's rerolls. In addition, Hunters of Ancient Relics. That's an option for the avatar. If you're planning to maybe play objectives with the avatar, and I think you should plan to have that option with it. And a little bit later in the video, I'll talk about why, but it has to do with the building a list that can take all comers, right? Hunters of Ancient Relics gives units an extra attack when they're on an objective, and so that increases the avatar's damage output yet more. So he's going from 7 or 8 attacks now to 8 or 9 attacks. That is at least on your turn, right? It's 1 less on your opponent's turn because you're not shooting in the shooting phase with the Wailing Doom. But that's a significant bump. Conservatively, you're looking at a 50% damage output increase over what it was in 8th edition, and you could reasonably hope for 60 or 70% depending on how you use it, maybe even more. And on top of all of that, it got a point drop in 2021 chapter approved to 200 points. Suddenly, this model really has some game. And we'll talk about how to make use of that game. So I've already talked a little bit about the avatar's strengths. It's incredibly potent in melee, and it's potent against specific types of enemies, right? What the avatar does not want to be engaged with is hordes. The worst use of your Avatar of Khaine is to fight a horde of 30 Hormigans. It'll kill a bunch of them, but it just won't kill them fast enough. It can be tied up for the whole game trying to do that. But tanks, monsters, enemy characters, are all, frankly, heavy infantry. Space Marine, Terminators, Custodies, Custody bikes, all of these are just A-list targets for the Avatar of Khaine. So it is, first and foremost, the Avatar of Khaine is a target elimination unit. Every unit in your army should have at least one job that it's doing. You know, some of them are there to score objectives. Some of them are there to score secondaries. Some of them are there to be speed bumps for your opponents. Some of them are there to buff other units. Some of them are there to be tar pit units to hold up. The Avatar of Khaine is a target elimination unit. It is there to kill stuff, but it's there to kill a very particular set of things. It's really everything except for light infantry and hordes. It's good against. That's what you want. The characters thing I want to explain just for a moment. So there are a lot of characters in the game that have either a 4-up or in some cases even a 3-up invuln. If you can get the Avatar of Khaine into combat with a character, say a Space Marine captain or something like that, even with that really good invuln, the Wailing Doom does so much damage, and a lot of character models don't have more than 6 wounds, that you really are likely, even if 2/3 of your attacks or 3/4 of your attacks are pinging off its invuln, you can probably kill just about anything, usually, in a round of combat. And if it really needs to die, there's always Jinx to lower an invuln also. So it's also very good at killing characters. I've already talked about its durability bonus from the Avatar Resurgent. The other strength of the Avatar is that even though it looks on the table like an enormous monster, and therefore it should stand out like the blazing incarnation of the Eldar war god that it is, it benefits from Lookout Sir. Mysteriously, an Avatar surrounded by 8 Storm Guardians cannot be targeted by enemy units shooting. Some Storm Guardian will heroically throw herself in front of the Avatar to take the las cannon blast or whatever. So that's super useful, right? It's a way to move the model across the table and keep it alive while you're doing it. So It can also be hidden pretty easily out of line of sight. I mean, that's true of most models in the game that aren't Titanic models, so I don't know if it bears saying. Liabilities, right? So those are the strengths. Really good at target elimination if you can get it into combat. It also, so this is cool. The Avatar of Khaine makes nearby Austriana units within 12 completely immune to morale tests. Most of the time, that doesn't really matter because most Craftworld's armies favor MSU-style lists, so smaller units. They already have high enough native leadership that generally they're not running away. But it actually, especially for the escort unit for the Avatar, whatever it's running with to make use of Lookout Sir, that can matter. Having, say, I don't know, if you have a bunch of Wraith Blades, I'm going to talk about Wraith Blades in a minute, say you had 6 or 7 Wraith Blades running with it, in theory, you could lose enough Wraith Blades that it was possible for you to fail a morale check. You don't want one to run away. And this saves you having to blow 2 command points on Insane Bravery. So it doesn't come up a lot, but that immunity to morale is not nothing. Counts for something. Liabilities of the Avatar. I've already talked about how in 8th edition it had trouble moving across the table. It only has a move of 7 inches. We don't generally think of 7 inches as slow. You know, that's Eldar. We think of Eldar infantry as fast, and your average Eldar infantry has a 7-inch movement. But for a dedicated melee unit that cannot advance and charge, 7 inches is slow. So it's not quick. Additionally, it struggles against shooting attacks if it's caught out in the open. It has a 5-up demon save. And speaking of the demon save, I am going to interrupt myself for a moment. Curiously, the Avatar of Khaine is tied rules-wise to Demon Princes of Khorne, which makes sense if you think about how the Demon Prince of Khorne is an incarnation of the god of murder, and the Avatar is essentially an incarnation of an Eldar god of murder. And there is some... There are interesting fuzzy edges in the lore, too, where maybe the Eldar gods, there might be some sort of mirror relationship with the Chaos gods, which would be... I have no idea what that means, but it's just sort of narratively curious. So it's got the 5-up demon save. It has the 5-up feel no pain. That's really not enough at toughness 6 to make it robust against, say, las cannons that are strength 8 and do D3 or strength 9 and are D3 plus 3. So you really do need to cover it if it gets caught in the open with shooting attacks, and then you can't use the Avatar of a Resurgent with. To make it survive a shooting attack. So if it gets shot down, you lose. In order to be an effective autarch, you have to move the Avatar around such that it's insulated from shooting. The other liability of the Avatar is that it is resource intensive. So although it doesn't require psychic buffs to perform well, you could do, its escort unit generally does, and the Avatar Resurgent that's a CP sink. So if you take an Avatar, in order for it to be effective, one of its liabilities is that you have to plan for those expenses. It means you're not spending those resources on other units. It might limit what else you can put into your list. So I said earlier in the video that I think that you should typically think about the Avatar of Khaine as a unit that you might want to contest objectives with, maybe. And the reason for this is that even though it's not an OBSEC unit, it can run quite effectively with an OBSEC unit. And against opponents who are not pushing a bunch of powerful melee monsters or heavy infantry or Terminators, whatever, into the middle of the table to be targets for the Avatar, it needs something that it can do. And if it's moving while it moves across the table towards your opponent, and if you've thought about it in terms of playing objectives as you move towards your opponent, the Avatar and its escort unit can be playing an objective, or you could create a situation where your opponent sort of has to challenge you on that objective. That can be useful too. Oh, last advantage to the Avatar that sort of goes with this build. If you're trying to run Warp Ritual and you need to hold the center of the table, or you need to make the center of the table safe for a Psyker in order to pull it off, the Avatar actually has good synergy with this. It is not itself a Psyker. You wouldn't want to use it for that anyway. But it's in melee. It's a durable sledgehammer. So the Avatar is particularly powerful at some sort of zone control. And the center of the table, within 12 inches of the center of the table, that's Warp Ritual. I think that's right. Maybe it's 6 from the center, it would be 12 across. But near the center of the table, you need to have a Psyker near the center of the table to pull that off. And so having something like the Avatar, which can help you dominate the middle of the table, can help with that. 2. So being able to play the objectives, potentially being able to play the center of the table for Warp Ritual, that's one way you want to think about being able to use the unit. And the other thing it's there for, and really its primary job, is going to be large target elimination. And we'll talk a little bit later in the video about how to set that up, how to engage, and what buffs to use. But first, let's talk about escorts. When you put an Avatar of Khaine into your list, the single most important decision you need to make about the Avatar of Khaine is what unit it's going to run with to take advantage of Lookout Sir as it moves across the table. Your first option, and I think one of the best options, is to run it with a unit of Wraith Blades. You can use 5, right? That's fine. I like 6, even though they're pretty expensive. And the reason that I like 6 is that they are infantry models, so they stop providing the Lookout Sir benefit once 2 are dead. And that's not, or when 3 are dead, excuse me, in a minimum squad of 5, because there need to be at least 3 models in an infantry unit or any non-vehicle unit or non-monster unit in order for Lookout Sir to be in effect. So having 3 Wraith Blades in the unit instead of 5 Wraith Blades gives you a little bit more play. You can lose 3 of them, and they're still providing cover to the Avatar. So the advantage to the Wraith Blades is that they're the single most durable infantry unit available to Eldar. They're toughness 6, they have 3 wounds, they come with their own 4-up invuln. If you're going to do this, you need to also be prepared. You might not have to, but you need to be prepared maybe to cast Protect on them, which gives them a 3-up invuln. If you want them to be insanely durable, you can also throw Fortune on there, or you can use Fortune on them and cast Protect somewhere else. Fortune gives them a 5-up Feel No Pain. Unless you're running, if you're running a detachment of Ulthwé Wraith Blades already have a 6-up Feel No Pain, which is super helpful because it means that because they have 3 wounds, any Wraith Blade that gets hit with a damage that does flat 3 damage that would kill it outright. Well, if you're rolling a d6 for each of those 3 wounds, and any 6s means that you survive the flat 3 damage hit, essentially you're shrugging off 50% of the incoming shots, the way the math works against flat 3 damage weapons. So a 6-up Feel No Pain for Wraith Blades is actually great, even though oftentimes for something like Guardians, it's not that important. But Fortune will give them a 5-up. You can make Wraith Blades incredibly durable while they move down the table with the Avatar. And so the advantage to choosing Wraith Blades is that your Avatar is nigh on invulnerable, and if your opponent wants to make it vulnerable, she's going to have to pour so many shooting attacks into those Wraith Blades, just insane amounts of resources to try to eliminate enough of them to get to the Avatar that, frankly, even if she succeeds, it's probably worth it. She probably has to ignore the entire rest of your army in order to do that. If you really max it out. You can also make them -1 to hit, either with a psychic power or with a stratagem. So in theory, you could have strength 6, toughness 6, 3 wound Wraith Blades, 3-up invuln, 5-up Feel No Pain, -1 to hit. That's incredibly hard to shift. It really does make the Avatar pretty much invulnerable. The other advantage to the Wraith Blades is that they add to the melee profile, and they also give a little bit of extra play against so one way to deal with something like an Avatar of Khaine is just tie it up with a disposable troops unit of Poxwalkers, or even something like a big unit of Termagants. Well, Wraith Blades, especially with axes, are not great at killing infantry. But if you have 6 of them and they charge, that's 18 attacks plus the 5 attacks from the Avatar, and all those units are fighting on both players' turns. Even something like 20 Termagants, you will chew through a unit like that reasonably effectively. So that's another advantage. And the last advantage is that I'm going to show you with these Tyranids, if you get into a situation where your avatar is able to charge a large melee unit. So let's say we get into combat with this Swarm Lord and maybe even also this Carnifex. The Wraith Blades can potentially pile in to try to lock units in combat so they can't escape. I've spoiled that by putting 2 models in. If there were just 1, we could have locked it. But even if you can't lock the units in combat, let's say I don't quite have the charge move to be able to pull that off. Even if I can't lock them in combat, what I can do is create a situation where even if my opponent falls back on her turn with these units, haha, I will shoot you, Avatar, I'm falling back. Well, because my escort is a melee unit, the closest models are still the escort, right? So the trap you can get into with the Avatar is you charge something, say you charge Mortarion, and he's pretty durable. You do some damage to him, but on your turn, Mortarion just flies away, right? He falls back out of combat. I don't think he would necessarily do that. One of the great things about the Avatar is that it's a counter for stuff like Demon Primarchs, because with the Avatar Resurgent, he can take their punches and they can brawl, and he's 200 points and most of them are like 400. So I think that the benefit here should be clear, and that is that one of the counters to the Avatar is that fallback move potentially can leave the Avatar exposed. So let's say I played this poorly. My escort is still a bit behind me. The Avatar is in melee. The Swarm Lord miraculously survives, falls back, and now my opponent's Exocrines are lighting up my Avatar with shooting weapons. I can't use Avatar Resurgent. He gets killed. Well, if the escort can pile in and fight, but also continue to be the closest models, then the Avatar continues to be protected even if an opponent falls back from combat. So that's a principle that's going to apply with most of the escort units. So I think Wraith Blades are a great pick for this. There are a couple drawbacks. One is that they don't have OBSEC. So I mentioned earlier, you want to be able to, you want your Avatar probably to strengthen and stiffen some sort of OBSEC escort as it moves across the table in case you come up against an opponent that doesn't have any obvious mid-board targets. So while the Avatar is moving across the board, it can also be doing something else. It can be helping you secure objectives. But Wraith Blades don't have OBSEC. So if some of them die, there's 3. You still have 4 models. But if your opponent, even if I'm down to 3 Wraith Blades, if my opponent has something that does have OBSEC, say some Custodes or something, potentially, that's a drawback. I'd lose the objective, and there's nothing you can do about that. That is a drawback. The other, I think, disadvantage to the Wraith Blades is that because they don't have a shooting attack, you might end up in a situation where the Avatar is sort of hovering in the middle of the table and your opponent is sort of ignoring it, and there's kind of no penalty for ignoring it because it has limited range with its sword and the Wraith Blades aren't packing any sort of a shooting attack. And so, you have to plan in order to make sure that it can get into combat. The Wraith Blades are slow. The Avatar is a bit slow. So let's talk about how to compensate for slowness. First of all, if you make the Avatar your Warlord, you can give it the Warlord trait Falcon's Swiftness, which will increase its move characteristic from a 7 to a 9, which doesn't sound like a lot, but add the smaller 8th edition table and the necessity of objective play, and it really does make a big difference. That means that if you make an advanced move with the Avatar and you play Matchless Agility, it's moving 15 inches on turn 1, which is good. That probably means it can get to combat, because on turn 2 it can then move 9 and charge. It's going to have no problem getting into combat. And that's really, you want the Avatar to be in the mix turn 2. It's very unlikely to get there on turn 1 unless your opponent comes to you, in which case great. But as long as it's there by turn 2, it can probably earn its keep. So then the issue with the Wraith Blades is, well, the Wraith Blades are even slower than the Avatar. They have a movement characteristic of 5, so what do I do about that? Obviously, you could quicken them, right? I tend to like on turn one when I'm using this build, I tend to like actually to use matchless agility on the Wraith Blades because you don't know for sure whether or not Quicken is going to go off. Psychic powers can fail. If you're running Seer Council and you have a nearby Farseer, you stand a reasonable chance of pulling it off. But if your opponent has denies, you never know. So if you Quicken the Wraith Blades, they're guaranteed an 11-inch move on turn one because they move 5. Then they get a maximum advance to 11. If you have Falcon Swiftness and you make a regular advance move with the Avatar, it can definitely keep up with them. It means you're only going 11 or 12 inches with the Avatar probably on turn one. But again, if on turn two we're moving, potentially quickening the Wraith Blades, you don't want to use matchless agility on turn two because if you advance, you can't charge. But it's usually enough to get you there. And again, because of the smaller table, because of the focus on objective play, being able to make an 11 or 12-inch move turn one and then a regular move followed by a charge on turn two is usually enough. Nevertheless, the Wraith Blades are the slowest escort option. But I still think this is one of the fastest, best options for an escort unit for the Avatar. Okay, so that's Wraith Blades. Your next option, another option, is to run the Avatar with 10 Dire Avengers and Asserman. And the reason that you need Asserman is you want the escort unit for the Avatar to have an invulnerable save. I'm going to be doing another video in the near future about how to play objectives, primary objectives with Craft Worlds. It's a real problem for a lot of people. And one of the problems people run into is they don't think about, or we just don't have enough durable units. So having a unit with an invuln save, which Asserman provides, he gives them a 4-up invuln, is huge because then you can cast Protect on the Dire Avengers. They have a 3-up invuln. If you also try to put Fortune on them, they have a 3-up invuln, a 5-up Feel No Pain. You can make them -1 to hit with a stratagem, much like the Wraith Blades. Suddenly, they're really, really durable. Also, unlike the Wraith Blades, they are a shooting threat, right? They have an 18-inch range with those Dire Avenger Shuriken Catapults. If you are running a custom Craft World with superior Shurikens, they have an even greater range. And if you run Hail of Doom, now suddenly these Dire Avengers are pretty dangerous, especially. And if you're going to run a big unit of Dire Avengers and toughen them like that with either Protect or Fortune, it's also very useful to take the Exarch power Avenging Strike. So as soon as the unit has lost any models, they have +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Suddenly those Shuriken Catapults are monstrous. They wound T7 units on a 4-up. Each one of those Avengers is shooting a couple of times. That in and of itself is a dangerous threat. And you can see some advantages over the Wraith Blades, right? They have OBSEC, right? So they've got serious presence on objectives. It's potentially unignorable if it's also dominating objectives. You can't just have it snatched off you with a troop unit, some sort of tar pit troop unit. This is a pretty effective build. There are some, and they're faster, right? They're a 7 instead of a 5 for movement. So the salute to moving them across the table, you do it the same way as with the Wraith Blades. Judicious use of matchless agility, advancing on turn one, quicken if you can get it off. Again, I don't use quicken a ton for this because the problem is you have to make the decision in the movement phase whether or not you're going to use matchless agility. And if you choose not to, and then you whiff the psychic roll on quicken, it can be disastrous. So generally, if you're going to use quicken, I think the way to think about it is it's an insurance policy. So if you're looking at a situation where they only really, as long as they go at least 9 inches, you'll probably be okay. And then quicken just makes it a sure thing. What you can do is not use matchless agility. You advance with them. Even if you roll poorly, you advance with the Avatar too. You set up a situation where if quicken doesn't go off, it's kind of fine. But generally, I think you're better off trying to do it just with matchless agility. So they have OBSEC. Wraith Blades don't have OBSEC. The disadvantage, there are a couple of disadvantages to this. One is they're expensive, right? Husserman is 160 points. So you're looking at 270 points for this escort. The Wraith Blades are expensive too, but 6 Wraith Blades are still noticeably cheaper. And frankly, if you don't get first turn, potentially... So I play against an AdMech list that makes use of these bombers on a pretty regular basis that do relatively significant numbers of mortal wounds. And if I don't get first turn and I don't put fortune on my Dire Avengers, that mortal wound spam on first turn and my deployment zone can wipe out most of those Dire Avengers. And the only way to prevent that is to put them in a Wave Serpent, but then that's another 150 points. And at that point, this escort has just become sort of nightmarishly expensive. So in certain matchups where, your opponent gets first turn and he or she has some way to target the Dire Avengers, especially with mortal wounds. There are multiple factions in the game that do have these bomber units available. Potentially that is a counter to this. And it is something to consider. Maybe it depends on what your local meta is like, but it's certainly something I have to consider. And against mortal wounds, those 6 Wraith Blades, they have 18 wounds, whereas my 10 Dire Avengers have 11. So the mortal wounds are a real problem. They're also not as good in melee, but on the other hand, Asserman is really good in melee and has a 3-up in invuln in melee too. So he's you have your own little super melee combo with Asserman and the Avatar. But you may reasonably wonder whether or not you're putting too many points into, whether it's overkill, right? So anything that the Avatar can kill, he probably doesn't need a ton of help from Asserman to take out anyway. I don't know. I still think this has some play. I think this is quite juicy, quite effective in the majority of matchups. I will say that much like with the Wraith Blades, if you're going to charge something with the Avatar, it is worth, and this is going to sound crazy, it is worth also charging with the Dire Avengers. I know they're not good in melee, right? But the reason for doing this, Asserman is though, the reason for doing this is the same reason that I'm not on camera here, hang on. Is the same reason that I mentioned with the Wraith Blades, and that is if the target, so for one thing, you want to try to prevent the target from falling back. So if you can wrap it or try point it, great. If they can still fall back if they spend command points, but then they have to spend command points. But if your opponent falls back, you want to be in a situation where your Avatar is still not vulnerable to shooting attacks. So it can be worth charging with the Avengers just to prevent that fallback followed by shooting attacks. Also, frankly, if you charge something big and bad, your opponent is not going to want to target the Avengers in melee with those big claws or something anyway. I mean, basically, you're just getting a bunch of additional attacks. Yeah, they're not likely to do much damage, but any hits they do is free damage, and they are likely to be pretty safe against most enemies. And frankly, if your opponent is targeting your 3-up invuln Dire Avengers with his or her Demon Primarch or whatever it is, that in and of itself is a win. So this is a strong pick, but again, it's expensive. It's a lot of points to invest. The Avatar is 200 points, and I just invested 270 points in an Escort for a 200-point model. And yeah, I'm adding a lot of additional utility because I have the OBSEC and I have the shooting, but nevertheless, it's something to consider. Okay. The most cost-effective Escort for the Avatar is Guardians. I'm going to throw some Storm Guardians down here first. And you may remember I said any Escort that runs with the Avatar probably should have an invuln save. Well, we all know there's only one way to give an invuln save, a good invuln save, to Guardians, and that is with Celestial Shield. And I thought I had 8. Well, imagine 2 more Storm Guardians there. 8 Storm Guardians are super cheap, right? This is, I think these are 7 points a model. Assume this guy doesn't have a fusion gun. This is the most cost-effective Escort for the Avatar. And again, if you cast Protect on them and you cast Fortune, they're just as tough as those Dire Avengers. They have a 3-up invuln with Celestial Shield against shooting. They have a 5-up Feel No Pain. I could potentially run 10 Storm Guardians, and 7 would have to die before the Avatar, or 8 would have to die before the Avatar was targetable, and I could make them very robust. I could even spend some CP to make them -1 to hit, or give them cover with Conceal, the Psychic Cast. So, great option, except of course the Celestial Shield doesn't work in melee, and so potentially your opponent could charge you with some Gene Stealers, or when you finally get to whatever it is you're fighting, the Storm Guardians may die quite quickly. On the other hand, if the thing you're fighting decides to target the Storm Guardians, then it's not targeting the Avatar. Maybe that's a win. But a really savvy opponent might charge with something like trade out a unit of Gene Stealers. I'm sorry, I have Tyranids on my mind because they're on the table, but trade out a unit of Demonettes or Poxwalkers or something, a smaller unit, to get rid of the Storm Guardians, and then just shoot the Avatar. Yeah, if I focus the melee attacks on the Storm Guardians, the Avatar is just going to kill me. But let's be honest, the Avatar was going to kill you anyway because of Avatar Resurgent. But once that Escort is dead, the Avatar is targetable. So the Storm Guardians will get your Avatar into melee, because in order to be eliminated efficiently, they need to be engaged in melee, which means the Avatar is there. But they're not necessarily likely to survive melee. I still think that this is super worth considering. You're saving like 200 points for not the same amount of utility, but still significant utility. You don't have to do it with Storm Guardians. You can do it with Guardian Defenders and a support platform. 10 Guardian Defenders with like a Shuriken Cannon support platform might also be a great option, because, you know, as they're advancing across the table, potentially they can shoot. That's why you take the Shuriken Catapult. Also, if you cast Protect on them, and they get targeted by, say, small arms fire that doesn't have AP, well, if you assign the incoming fire to the support platform, that thing has a 3-up save. With the +1, it goes to 2-up. You might not even need Celestial Shield to make this unit really durable. It's a bit more expensive than the Storm Guardians, but potentially really good. Again, they will melt in melee, so very much like running the Storm Guardians. But they again, like the Storm Guardians, can help you deliver the Avatar. Slightly more expensive. Pretty good option. The last option is to try to run the Avatar behind a tank or monster. So if you have a Wave Serpent that's already filling some other role in your army, like it disgorges something on turn 1, you could use it to shield your Avatar, or maybe you have a couple of Wraith Lords in your army that can provide cover from shooting attacks. This is good in that you probably didn't build in the escort points specifically to be an escort, and so in that sense, maybe it's even cheaper than the Storm Guardians insofar as it is quote-unquote free, although you're giving up the OBSEC that Guardian Defenders or Storm Guardians would provide, which I've already established. I think the Avatar is good for reinforcing objective holding units as you move across the table, so that's a loss. The other thing that I don't love about this is that the way Lookout Sir is written, the insulating model also has to be closest to the shooter. And so if your opponent has anything highly mobile, like a flying tank or something that can get behind the Avatar, then it can just light it up with guns and ignore the Wraith units entirely. Also, those Wraiths don't have an invuln save. They don't, which makes me sad. But yes, they're T8, but a las cannon is strength 9, goes straight through their armor. It is D3+3. If you or Dark Lance also -4. That one's strength 8. But nevertheless, if you come up against an army that has an updated codex with anti-tank weapons that already do D3+3, like our Bright Lances inevitably will when we get a codex, suddenly Wraith Lords are not all that durable for their points. And so I think you can do this in some metas and some matchups. It might work really well. I actually think it's the weakest of the 4 options that I have presented. Okay, lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to deploy and how to play this on the first turn. I don't think anything I'm about to say is going to be terribly groundbreaking. I think it's obvious, but sometimes stuff that people who've played a lot of Warhammer think is obvious is really not all that obvious for new player. I remember when I was a new player, there's all sorts of stuff that I had no idea about. So you want to start your Avatar of Khaine completely out of line of sight of the enemy. So I have a piece of terrain here that's over 5 inches tall. It's obscuring. I'm positioning the avatar. I'm going to turn the camera a little. I'm positioning the avatar completely out of line of sight. And the escort unit 2, ideally, should be out of line of sight. If the escort unit is something like Wraith Blades, it's probably not terrible if it's a little bit, say, in the footprint of a building and is targetable, because, again, if they're shooting your Wraith Blades, maybe they're not shooting something else, and you want your opponent to focus on shooting your most durable units. That's going to be a decision you make based on the matchup you happen to find yourself in. But anyway, so I have my avatar as forward in my deployment zone as he can be, positioned on the table towards the target that is most vulnerable, and then in my movement phase, I'm going to declare an advance. I like to move, if you decide to move the escort unit first, be sure to leave a place for the avatar in the escort unit. So when you move out, so let's say they make an advance move, they move 11 inches. I've got my tape measure here, so they're actually infantry, so they can run straight through this building and breach it. So that's what they're going to do. Scoot them around, pretend these Tyranids aren't here. And I want to make sure that I leave a way for the avatar into the center of them, such that, back the camera up a little bit, whoop, such that it can benefit from Look Out, Sir. I have occasionally, in profoundly stupid moments, I need to leave room for it to get around the side of the building because it can't breach. In profoundly stupid moments, I have occasionally moved an escort unit for a character and forgotten to leave a place for the character in the center of the unit, and man, does that feel bad. That is just such a rookie player. So make sure you leave space for the avatar. The other thing you can do is move the avatar first and then just move the unit up around it. And that's fine too, but I often find that my escort unit is actually in the way initially, so I have to move that one first. So you use Matchless Agility, you make an 11-inch move with the Wraith Blades, or if it's Dire Avengers, you use Matchless Agility or Guardians, and that gives you a 13-inch move. And then the Avatar, if you've taken Falcon Swiftness, and again, I think it's a good idea, makes an advance move of 9 plus D6. So that 11-inch move on the Wraith Blades, well, the worst move your Avatar could end up with is 10 inches. So even if you whiff it, he'll still benefit from Look Out, Sir, and probably he'll do even better, so you'll be able to place him anywhere you want in relation to that unit. The only other thing that you need to consider is that there might be an argument in deployment for using Phantasm. I definitely think that against any opponent, it makes sense to begin by positioning your avatar out of line of sight. And this is because sometimes, right, there's something to be said for using Phantasm to move a aggressive melee unit, like a big unit of Shining Spears, from behind obscuring terrain to the forward edge of your deployment zone so that they can then be moved, quickened, and charge something on turn one, which maybe they could not have done as reliably if they had stayed just out of line of sight. I think that the limited movement on the Avatar is such that he's not going to fight on turn one anyway. I mean, if you look at your opponent's army and you see they have a bunch of stuff that's going to jump into the middle of the field, and if you were to use Phantasm on the Wraith Blades and the Avatar and quicken, you could get them there on turn one, then by all means consider using Phantasm to move them. But if that is not the case, I really think you're better off just saving the command points and planning the 11 or 12-inch per turn march up the field, and probably you're going to be there turn two. So there it is. The Avatar of Khaine, great target elimination, powerful reinforcement for objective holders, and way better in 9th edition than it was in 8th edition. Like I said earlier, it made an appearance in a top 3 GT list, I think last summer in a 9th edition Grand Tournament. So it has some play. It's not one of the very best things available to Craft Worlds, but if you plan for it, you think about it, and you use it well, this thing can be a lot of fun on the table and really do well for you. That's it. Looking forward to seeing you next time. If you haven't commented and or liked the video and you'd like to see more content, please do. And if you haven't been over to craftworld.com recently, www.craftworldeldar.com, you might check it out. I've got a new article going up, I think, next week, and there's some other recent content on the blog section. Also, some of you have been sending me emails asking me if I'm ever going to do a Venmo or a Patreon thing where you can, if you want to support the site, buy a t-shirt. There's a merchandise link on the website, and there's, mugs and things also. So if you're feeling generous and supporty, check out the merchandise. Thanks, guys. I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Best of luck in your next game. Bye.